Hello and welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series, brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families Children's Bureau. My name is Philip Breitenbuscher, and I'm your host for today's webinar. Today's discussion is entitled Security, Keeping Data Safe. We do encourage active participation throughout today's webinar, so you can type questions in using the Q&A feature, which should be located either at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen. We will be monitoring that throughout the webinar, so please submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature. We prefer questions in the Q&A feature rather than chat, so that we can be sure that we are responding to each of those questions. You can also ask a question live using the raise hand feature, and we will then be able to unmute you. Once you've raised your hand, please monitor your chat. One of us will send a private chat to you, just ensuring that you're ready to ask that question live, and then we will unmute your line and you'll be called upon, and then you'll be able to ask the question. If you called into today's webinar, you can just dial *9 and the presenter will also be able to unmute your line that way. After today's webinar, you can continue to submit questions either to your analyst or to cwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov. In addition to the questions in today's webinar, we will have a couple polling questions that we're going to ask you to participate in, and we would appreciate timely response to those polls as well. Let me now introduce our presenter for today's webinar. First, you will hear from Spencer Wilder III. He is an analyst with the Division of State Systems. Then you will hear from Sujata Meenakshi Sundaram. She is a federal contract support, and Charlie Thompson, also federal contract support. Once again, my name is Philip Breitenbuscher, and I'm also federal contract support. So let's go ahead and jump into our first polling question. The question we have for you today is, what is the primary role that you play in relation to CWIS at your agency? Please make a choice now. All right, more than half of you have already responded. Thank you very much. All right, give you just a few more seconds to make your selection there. All right, and I think we can show the results. All right, so it looks like 36% of you identify as your agency coming from the business or IT analyst, and about a quarter of you identify as an IT director or project manager. About 14% information security. Thank you for joining us today. Only 3% identify as child welfare directors or managers. Another 6% as child welfare program or policy staff, and a 3% as quality assurance or CQI. 1% also in our fiscal budget claims. Excellent. Thank you for being here. Thank you for responding to that poll. It does help our presenters kind of know who's in the audience. So we appreciate your responses there. Go ahead and we'll move to our second poll question now. So for your agency, who is responsible for cyber, data, or IT security? Please make your selection. Thank you for your participation. We see that more than half of you have already responded. We appreciate that. All right, we're going to give this just a few more seconds, and then we'll close out this poll and share the results. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. So about half of you say the department has a security office for all the agency. And about a third of you said it's multi-tiered, centralized and department level security. 14% our child welfare agency administration has its own security. Just one of you said there's a security vendor, and one of you, brave soul, said, I'm not sure exactly. I have no idea. So once again, thank you for participating in those poll questions. It does help our speakers kind of get to know you and who's in our audience just a bit better. So we appreciate that. All right. With that, I am pleased to now welcome our first presenter, Spencer Wilder. Spencer?
Good afternoon or good morning, depending upon what part of the country you're in. My name is Spencer Wilder, and I'm the analyst with DSS, Division of State Systems. In behalf of the Children's Bureau, I want to thank you all for attending this webinar session. In terms of welcoming remarks, we kind of wanted to start off this session with some things that we know. So first, we know that ultimately we are responsible for handling data from some of the most vulnerable people. We need to ensure that information is stored, transmitted accurately and securely, and accessed appropriately. We also know that in the pursuit of Seaways and innovation, there are going to be more hands that possibly touch the system and the data. Multiple developers, agile development, cross disciplinary teams, increases with data exchanges, access to data from more stakeholders, including CWCAs or child welfare contributing agencies, families and youth. All of this increases the sheer number of people that will handle sensitive information. We also know that there's been an increase in threats and breaches on a regular basis. We hear about a lot of the breaches, and it's a constant battle to remain vigilant and respond to them in a quickly manner. And lastly, we know that all this is happening within a culture and a landscape of mobile phones, remote workforces, social media apps, and users wanting information readily at their fingertips. Uh, so all of that is makes this presentation on security paramount and timely. Uh, Here again, the goal is not to overburden or to make this process harder or more cumbersome and complicated, to increase clicks or to limit functionality. It's important to know up front that security is not something that you have to endure, uh, but it should be seen as just one part of a healthy system. And so the goal here is to figure out how to do it more securely. So, in order to have a full discussion, we need to ensure that you're prepared and have a full understanding of our guidance in this area. In full disclosure, we intentionally kept today's webinar at a high level, but even at that level, there's a lot of information, and the webinar is packed. We are including resource and reference information that we hope will be useful to you, and we will be sending out this to all the registrants after the webinar. Our hope for today is that you'll walk away with the following: a renewed interest in knowing what to do when a data incident or breach occurs at your agency, and be ready to act. A firm understanding that security is a shared responsibility, which means vigilance, communication, and coordination of efforts at all levels. And a way to use the federal guidance to improve your security posture on a day to day basis and provide information that will strengthen the posture and really highlight areas for you to pay attention to. Next slide. So, in looking at the agenda, the focus of my portion of the presentation will really be to offer an overview of our federal guidance. I know it may seem counterintuitive to kind of start off talking about breaches and incidences, um, but we believe it's a good place to start to have a clear understanding of the things we want to minimize. I will also share some information about developing security plans to help you increase your security posture and keep your information safe. After that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and my co-facilitators to talk about various approaches we're currently using to prevent the threat of data, uh, and a focus on cloud systems that more agencies are adopting as a part of their IT infrastructure. Next slide. So let's get started. Next slide. So there's a growing number of terms and jargon related to security, but for our purposes, we're kind of narrowing our focus in this webinar down to two essential concepts or terms. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading the slide, but I think it's important to know the difference between the two. So an incident is really an occurrence that actually or potentially jeopardizes the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of data within your system. A breach, on the other hand, is the loss of control, compromise, unauthorized disclosure of said information. Um, it's important to know the difference between the two. Oftentimes, the definition of a breach will actually use the word incident, but what's highlighted here is that what happens in the difference between the two is really about what happens to the data. Incidents will put your agency at risk of losing data. Breaches are where data is actually lost. So, in other words, all data breaches are definitely incidents, but not all incidents are data breaches. In terms of giving some examples, um, think about the caseworker or the supervisor um, who accesses information about friends or relatives who are recently come to the agency's attention. Things that are normally outside of their normal scope of their job. A worker that downloads personal apps on agency laptops or mobile devices and really grants permissions, unknowingly grants permissions to access information on those devices. Uh, an unauthorized worker who's able to alter or delete data within your system of record. Uh, the sending of referral and case information by CWCA via email that may not be encrypted, or workers that are testing the system and have access to production data, including PII and PHI. A super user that has the ability to create and approve financial payments for a provider, or maybe an AI tool that could inadvertently match and merge wrong clients. All those are examples of incidents that you need to be aware of. When it comes to breaches, um, examples include workers that may send client names and social security numbers to providers to via email, in the search to get services. Maybe older youth who have been given an agency device and they grant permissions to share, sometimes their personal information and address. Data exchanges that may inadvertently end up to with the wrong provider. All of these things are opportunities of there being breaches where information was lost. The one thing to note about these definitions is that it doesn't really talk about internal or external. They can both come, breaches and incidents can both come from outside or from inside an organization. Second thing to note about these definitions is that there's no standard on threshold. The definitions really talk about there being a single occurrence. So in theory, one incident is just as significant as 100. Now, of course, your response is going to vary, but the point is that there should be a response. And lastly, this isn't to always assume that all of these events are malicious. There are many times where workers believe that they are really doing what they need to do, and they believe it's more effective and efficient. Next slide. So now that we've kind of talked about, and really honed in on what we're looking at, I think it's important to talk about the other side or the end result and the impact that breaches can have. Ultimately, child welfare and social work practices relies on us being good data stewards, administering and coordinating services as an agent for someone else, which is a lot different than you giving your personal information for your own purposes. Um, we are asserting that the information that we are, bound to protect is not going to be used in any way to further injure or hurt people that we're mandated to serve. So this slide represents a number of the possible outcomes of security incidents and breaches. But what I really want to highlight is the impact that it carries on program, practice, and people. Users want to be assured that data is secured and protected. So outside of your reputation, there needs to be an understanding that these things can really impact a person's entire lifetime, and go far beyond just the event itself. So once again, we don't want to make vulnerable people more vulnerable. Uh, you know, I so one of the basic tenets of CBIS really is data integrity. And data integrity refers to the reliability and the trust that you have in data throughout its life cycle. Life cycle. Um, Workers want to make sure that the data is accurate and confident in the data that they see on a screen. Without that, everything suffers. User adoption of your system, the ability to make data decisions, clinical decisions, everything becomes at risk. Next slide. So we want to shift right now, since we've talked about the kind of bookends, we've talked about the definitions, and we talked about the consequences. And so now I'm going to spend the remaining time of my time in this presentation really focusing on our guidance, which is IM 1504. We've provided the link. You can also find this information on our website, but we want to get into some of the particulars about how you can actually operationalize some of the information here. Next slide. So NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, really does a really good job at outlining the basic progression of an incident response. And just like a lot of things in the IT world, there's a life cycle to it. So for simplicity and kind of ease of reference, we're actually going to condense these four areas into three phases: preparation, response, and post-incident activity. And so we wanted to use this diagram, just more of a visual representation of what's in the IM, and as a way to talk about some of the major points in the IM. Next slide. So it's really important to know from the onset that all three of these phases have one basic assumption: there will be a security threat. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So it's really important that all states embrace this and plan accordingly. Not going to go through the full list, but there are a couple of things that we wanted to highlight. First and foremost, making sure that you review your system and identify where sensitive data resides. Know where your confidential data is. More importantly, are you tracking that through the entire process? What happens with the old data? Can you trace every touch point where your data is collected, stored, and transmitted? What does security awareness look like in the social media and smartphone and mobile app world? The second thing to highlight is to really assess the applicable confidentiality and breach notification laws. Do you know when you're legally responsible for notifying impacted individuals? Are there security measures and incident measures in your data sharing agreements, in your MOUs or your MOAs, in your contracts and in your RFPs? And lastly, developing program procedures and practice. And make sure to include, people practices. There's no IT system that can really account for the things that humans do. So you want to make sure that you pay attention to those things that could inadvertently put you in an insecure or unsecure posture. Next slide, please. So CISA, which is really the Federal Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency, has put out a strategic plan, and they really are urging people to have a shields up approach, and for that to be the new norm. At the heart of that plan and at CISA's mission is really one of partnership and collaboration. And so security is seen as a shared responsibility, with the foundation really being hinged on having a strong team. The purpose of this slide is really to make sure that we convey the importance of knowing your players. Um, we just did a poll question, and some of you all have internal entities that deal with security. Some have direct folks who deal with security, but it's very important that you know who's involved in your security uh, matrix. Who's responsible for the plan, or are they directly responsible or indirectly responsible? The most important thing is to really focus on the role that that person has in your security plan and not necessarily their title. They may be called different names, and you want to kind of steer away from having titles, but you need to know who's involved in the process and what they do. And please don't forget external resources. Remember to include your CWCAs, any other entity that could touch your data. They all need to be a part of this process, and they need to be able to inform how security is viewed. Next slide, please. Got it. The second step in terms of response here, again, I'm not going to read all the options here, but the important thing here is to make sure that you assemble your incident response team. Um, individually, you may not be aware of all the ramifications of a breach or an incident. You really need to rely on the expertise of your team to review and to make decisions and recommendations. This is not a time to be exclusive or to make decisions based on a small number of individuals. The other thing I wanted to highlight is really to preserve the evidence. Do you have audit logs? Is there adequate documentation that you can use to really gather around the incident or the breach? Next slide, please. And then post breach, lastly, what happens afterwards? Once the threat's been resolved or there's no longer an immediate issue, undoubtedly there'll be a sigh of relief, and you want to be able to just kind of underscore the need to do post breach activities. Uh, Make sure that you modify your plan response and your strategies and your security controls. Highlight those areas where you need to really improve upon your plan. Um, and lastly, in terms of enhancing and modifying information security and training programs, make sure that you keep your staff informed. You don't want to have repeat behaviors. You don't want things that the staff don't know about and that they could ultimately do over and over again. Um, be sure to document anything and everything. You may want to consider, adding this to your software development lifestyle. I know the life cycle. I know that there are a lot of times when folks are using agile development and methodologies, and you have teams put together. You may want to add a security member to the team and to make sure that you're making this something that you talk about on a regular basis. Promote drills. Growing up, we all had to do fire drills. Fortunately, there were no fires, but we knew what we needed to do in the case that there was one. And so make sure that you on somewhere not only just monitoring, but you're also doing things to make sure that the team knows what to do when called upon. Next slide, please. HIPAA guidelines. Be mindful of the fact that there are certain incidents and breaches that when it relates to HIPAA data, that there'll be special circumstances and activities that you're going to need to do. Extra steps that you may need to take. So individual notices, media notices, and notifying the secretary are things that you're going to have to do in the event that HIPAA data is somehow threatened or breached. Next slide. So your agency, in terms of being prepared to take action, your agency really should have an incident response team, uh, which is kind of and a plan to go through every step of what happens when there's an incident or a breach. It's important that you update these plans, the procedures are written down, and you have communication at all levels, and that every person knows what to do. The one thing that I would add to this particular slide is to make sure that you know how quickly your team can mobilize and respond. You want to make sure that these folks can be able to be responsive and readily accessible. Next slide, please. And in terms of the overall kind of larger implications, you really should have a security plan. Um, all the things that we're talking about should roll up into that plan. You want to be able to have a full 360-degree picture of the system and the security. Your agency department most likely has one, but make sure that the things that are involved in your incident response plan are also a part of your security system plan, and make sure that they're clearly documented. Um, the particulars of the security plan could actually be a topic of an entire new webinar. So we're not going to go into the detail, but in the references and resources attached to this presentation, we have templates. We don't endorse any particular template, but it does offer a way to give a more complete thought in thinking about how your security needs to be addressed holistically. Also keep in mind that DSS also conducts CWIS reviews, and that the agency under CWIS regulations is really required to perform regular security and vulnerability scans. And so it's something that we're going to be taking a look at on occasion. We would also encourage you to include some of this information in your APD submissions. It's always nice to be able to see the security measures that uh, folks are taking and to make sure that the data is protected and secured. And lastly, make sure that you use the self-assessment tool. Those are attached to technical bulletin number 7, but that security self-assessment tool really does lay out all the regulations and gives you an idea as to what to prepare for. So with that, I don't know if there are any other questions in the queue.
There have been several questions submitted to the Q&A function, which we appreciate. And at this point, we've responded to each of those, and we just want to encourage participants to continue submitting questions using the Q&A feature.
Thank you, Phil. So with that being said, prevention is a very important part of the security plan, not just when there's a breach. So I want to introduce my colleague, Sujatha, to really discuss threat prevention in greater detail.
Thank you, Spencer. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sujatha Meenakshi Sundaram. I'm Federal Contract Support. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about security preventive measures and about cloud security. Next slide, please. What exactly do we mean by threat prevention? It normally involves preventing and or reducing unauthorized access to assets while protecting the information against potential security threat. You may have heard the expressions detection is the new prevention or real-time detection is critical in preventing attacks. Have you ever wondered why? Because the attacks in today's threat landscape are constantly evolving in order to evade security measures. But make no mistake, prevention is an essential component of any security strategy. For increasing its effectiveness by focusing on threat behavior and limiting subsequent actions that Spencer talked about previously to protect against threats, including zero-day vulnerabilities. When we say zero-day vulnerability, what exactly do we mean by that? It is a security risk in a software that is not publicly known, or the vendor is not aware of it yet, or the patching is not done. It has a high success rate as agencies do not have defenses in place to detect or prevent them. That brings me to my next point. The main goals of the security strategies are to protect critical assets, maintain effective security solutions, and of course, bring more visibility into what's happening and build resilient systems. Because of the evolving threat landscape and expanding attack surface, there is a need to evaluate emerging prevention techniques in order to build a resilient system that can boost users' trust and their confidence as well. Next slide, please. I would like to illustrate this point by showing you a diagram that represents the pillars of an adaptive security prevention strategy: the detection, prediction, prevention, and response. It aligns with the NIST framework, the 5 pillars of security strategy, as you all would have been aware of. Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recovery are those 5 pillars. Next slide, please. I would like to present threat prevention strategies in the next couple of slides, which has links to provide reference materials that are not being covered in the webinar today. The goal of a prevention strategy is to protect critical assets, as we all know, and implement security policies that are in line with the business requirements, and improve operations and increase visibility. So the agencies deal with threats like malware, ransomware, distributed denial of service, data leaks, insider threats, unauthorized access, to name a few. The first step in developing the prevention strategy is the discovery phase. What exactly do we mean by discovery phase? It includes an assessment of the current state, discovering the assets the agency manages and owns, remote and hybrid work model the agency offers, and different platforms, which includes on-premise data centers, hybrid or cloud platforms, and assess the business value and what would be the expected future state. Although there is no one-size-fits-all prevention methods, agencies do employ a range of methods, including firewalls, encryption, anti-malware, access controls, or network security policies, and so on. Today, we will talk about few approaches that assist the organization in determining what will work best for them. Some of them are data-centric approach, shift-left security, or security by design model, zero trust security, and integrated advanced threat prevention, leveraging artificial intelligence to assess vulnerabilities. And these are all part of proactive security measures to prevent attacks. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at some of the strategies that could help finalize these approaches. It could be the assets that the organization manages. It could be the use of enterprise identity security, or they would be handling sensitive data and privacy, or they needed enterprise level adaptive security solutions, or they want a proactive monitoring with improved threat intelligence, or they wanted to prioritize more visibility to handle zero threats. And some of the security threats that you see emerging in the market today include understanding the attack surface expansion. What we mean by that is there is a lot of hybrid and remote work models, multiple devices and channels are being used. That obviously increases the attack surfaces, and utilizing identity management solution and need for evaluating zero trust framework, using more of a cloud, hence cloud security is another emerging trend. Shift left security or security by design, and having the need for distributed decision making. And a lot of workflows are getting automated these days, so that is another emerging trend. And having a security solution consolidation, because there will be a number of security tools and solutions will be used, and there is always a need for consolidating to give a centralized monitoring and management. So we should keep in mind the organization challenges when we finalize these approaches, such as they already would be dealing with legacy infrastructure or legacy applications, decentralized security, IT and operations, and evolving cyber threats on top of it, expanding attack surfaces, and continuously evolving regulatory landscape, especially in this domain, is some of the challenges that the organization currently deal with, and that needs to be considered before they finalize these approaches. It should be noted that the expected outcome of any such strategy, including the security prevention strategy, is the need to get a centralized monitoring or a governance to improve operation. And the primary goal would be protecting the assets and secure delivery of services to consumers, and improve defense against threats, and of course, optimized solution and highly available resilient systems. When we offer all these, it will improve the user's trust and confidence in the end. Next slide, please. In this slide, I would like to draw attention to a few prevention methods. At the application layer, you would have been using web application firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention solutions, static and dynamic application security testing, part of development and security and operations. And at the network layer, you would be using secured gateways, firewalls, network traffic analysis and monitoring, and endpoint, antivirus, anti-spyware, data loss prevention policies, and multiple device management, to name a few. Before I move on to the next section, let me pause to see if you have any questions. If not, next slide, please. Thank you. I would like to move on to the prevention approaches section. We have data-centric security. So what does the term data-centric security mean? It focuses on what and how data should be protected, with less emphasis on data location. So it can provide a continuous protection when the data is at rest and data in transit, as well as a centralized control in accordance with the agency's security and compliance requirements. It will be interesting to know how does it differ from the traditional approach. Traditional approach primarily focuses on protecting where the data is located. So there is always a continuous need for developing different strategies for different type of data sources, and also when the data is moving, when the data is in transit. Next slide, please. The data-centric approach has a number of advantages. So it can help the agency to tailor it to the needs of the business. It can protect sensitive data to reduce business risk. It can provide ease of maintenance and centralized governance. And on a high level, let's talk about how do we design and implement this strategy. The organization needs to start with data discovery and classify the different data that they use and manage and access, data access methods, the type of access controls, and evaluating dynamic data masking solutions, and looking into the persistent encryption. Persistent encryption means at the field level or at the record level, or encryption in transit or encryption at rest, and developing data loss prevention policies, retention and purge policies, and not the least, having a very reliable data backup and recovery solutions. I mentioned about access control, so wanted to briefly talk about the same. The role-based access control follows the principle of least privilege. So it can allow or restrict access based on the user role. And similar to that, attribute-based access control allows or restrict data access, but it can provide a fine-grained authorization using attributes before granting access to the users. And I would also like to quote from the annual cost of the database report, which we shared the link in reference section. The loss of the customer personal identifiable information was the most expensive, that's what they said, compared to other type of data. So approximately $180 per stolen record or a lost record compared to $160 for the other type of records that they lose. So it is very critical for us to look into some of the new approaches when it comes to protecting the sensitive data. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at the shift-left security approach here. It entails incorporating security into every stage of the software development process to achieve the security by design model. So security by design has become a buzzword these days. It is about incorporating security decisions as early as possible. That's what it means. This focuses on implementing security controls from the foundation of the entire IT infrastructure design. So you may be thinking like, why do we even need security by design or shift-left security model? It secures system more efficiently by addressing security early in the process. One of the examples that I wanted to highlight because of the illustrations that we have in the slide, which is DevSecOps, which means integrating security in development and operational methodology. It provides application and infrastructure. It can secure application infrastructure, the entire layer, and ensure that the application is less vulnerable. And you may be thinking, how do we do that? There are many steps, many layers, but I just wanted to give it at the high level. We can automate security testing. We can detect attacks. We can prevent exploits by analyzing the infrastructure and environment, like applications or containers or the networks or the APIs. And a few other steps we can include in integrated security scanning and testing. You may be thinking, like, does it have any added advantages? Of course, yes. It assists in training the team to code securely. It can help address the gaps in current security measures. It ensures the security is implemented at all levels. It can help analyze the code to perform vulnerability assessments, and it can increase efficiency through built-in security, code quality checks, and offer a very high quality product in the end. The reason being, it'll have reduced production issues, it'll improve the performance, and then it can provide a cost-effective solution for the agency. Next slide, please. This leads me to the next approach, which is zero trust strategy or a model. It emphasizes on users, applications, and infrastructure without assuming any implicit trust is granted to assets or user accounts based on their ownership or their location. So why is a zero trust model or a strategy is necessary? Because of prevalent use of cloud services these days and hybrid and remote work models, multiple channels that increase attack surface. So this zero trust model can offer an effective approach to protect against ransomware, insider threats, or unmanaged devices. In the end, it can improve the user experience and trust. On a high level, we can see how we can implement the zero trust model. It adheres to verify and never trust approach. It presumes breach. So given that, it focuses heavily on the users, assets, and resources. It can decentralize the data and keep access more granular. Again, we are talking about access here. So this access is need-to-know basis and it's enforced by policies. So let me highlight the zero trust approach and least privilege principle here. The principle of least privilege, you may have already be aware of it. It refers to the approach of restricting access for users or accounts and approving only the resources that they need to perform authorized activities. But the zero trust, it has never trust, always verify policy, which is also based on the least privilege. However, the access is only provided after several variables have been verified. So it is highly recommended to evaluate an integrated design approach that could apply both least privilege and then zero trust model. We can now look at the approach at the different levels. I don't want to go in detail, but at the user level, you would be having a strong authentication before authorizing users access to assets. At the application, we can remove implicit trust with application and its components. Following no trust granted to assets approach will be used in the infrastructure layer. From the effectiveness standpoint, it simplifies the enterprise level security architecture and it improves the user experience. Next slide, please. What steps would follow in putting this strategy into practice? That's the question every agency organization would be thinking. The organization can begin by assessing the current state. They can define what would be the baseline. What is the target to develop a transition planning, because it's not a big bang approach. They have to slowly, gradually move from and address the gaps while they're doing the transition planning. And analyzing the gaps to address any data interoperability challenges that they would come across. And develop some continuous authentication or a continuous multi-factor authentication model, and also evaluate if attribute-based access control or any other form of access control would work for their agency and applications. And using static and dynamic security scanning, and of course, implementing an enterprise level identity and access governance with a more emphasis on the data security and handling, of course, on adding the business value to it. Let me pause to see if we have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there are a couple questions that have come in, and we're going to continue to monitor those. So thank you for those who have submitted your questions via the Q&A function. I also wanted to let you know that you can use the raise hand function and ask your question live if you'd prefer to do that. So thank you very much. If you'd like to continue.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Moving on to this slide, which discusses the use of artificial intelligence in threat prevention strategies. Why do we think that threat prevention techniques can be improved using artificial intelligence? Because one of the main thing is it can dynamically discover the known threats. It can detect unknown patterns that can aid in improving the threat intelligence. It can be used to locate known risk on the go and find previously undetected trends that can improve it. It can give you a real-time analysis of data so that the agency can prioritize vulnerabilities according to their risk level and improve threat detection by lowering the false positives, meaning it is false positive, meaning it is an alert that incorrectly indicates that vulnerability is present. For example, if the security team identified a pattern to catch a type of a malware or any other vulnerability, there would be an alert that was raised when the malware is not even present. So that's what it means about a false positive here. So it can help lower that and also suggest remediations. So next slide, please. I would like to illustrate this point by showing you a chart from a National Vulnerability Database, which shows vulnerability distribution by year and impact. This slide it talks about the security issues that are publicly disclosed. According to Common Vulnerabilities and Exploits CVE, there are about 12,000 security vulnerabilities so far in 2021, similar pattern in 2020, and same followed in 2022 somewhat. So it shows that average severity of the vulnerability is 7 in 10. So why we are showing this here is there is always a constant need to improve threat intelligence and prevention techniques, and those are all very critical. Next slide, please. What measures can an organization take to put the strategy into action? So when we think about that, the first step would be the organization can identify the business requirements that add value. For example, do we need to improve malware detection? Do we need to have a better solution for the vulnerability management? Or do we need to have a integrated intrusion detection and prevention solution? Something like that. And identify the different data sources that they get information from and exchange information to, and also assess the risk of a user behavior, so that helps them to classify the risk and have a better understanding of malicious behavior and identifying it, and then detecting those anomalies. So I would like to again quote from the annual cost of a data breach report here. Quote, they said, the adoption of AI, the artificial intelligence, is one of the top mitigating factors to reduce the cost of a breach. This is about the public sector. So it's about saving companies anywhere between 1.25 million to 1.49 million compared to those who did not have significant usage of these tools. But this gives a little bit more insight into looking into the artificial intelligence in threat prevention strategies. Next slide, please. I would like to move on to this section, which is about integrated advanced threat prevention. Again, the question would come up in everyone's mind is, why do we require advanced threat prevention? Because threat actors use sophisticated tools day in and day out, and those techniques compromise the network and gain access to sensitive data. As a result, we must protect data and assets in an ever-changing threat landscape. Every minute, every day, there are new threats, potential threats, undetected patterns coming up in the market. And this advanced threat prevention solutions can help lower the cost of mitigation that Spencer talked earlier. And also it can increase the customer trust and confidence at the same time. So what are we trying to safeguard here? There are some examples like users' data or application, cloud apps, multiple endpoints, identities, infrastructure. Those are all examples of what we are trying to safeguard. And the next step here would be like, how do we go about it? Like what would be the next step? We can look into, we can validate and verify and monitor the user accounts and admin accounts, so that like the anti-phishing, compromised identities, or to protect the identities can be managed. We can protect multiple devices and other endpoints. We can protect the data, documents, the files. We can scan the emails and attachments for malware or spoofing or any other threats. And we can also protect the infrastructure assets such as servers or network, the storage, database, on-premise and hybrid environments. Currently, the agencies use different type of solutions. There is no one-size-fits-all. Some of them would be the endpoint protection or security monitoring tools or multi-factor authentication, content filtering, firewall management tools, and so on. Before I move on to the next slide, which is cloud security, next section, I would like to quote Gene Spafford, who is the director of audit and security in Purdue. He mentioned something about what system would be considered more secure, whether it should be switched off or unplugged and kept in a titanium safe, in a concrete bunker surrounded by armed guards and everything. Still, he said he wouldn't put his he wouldn't stake his life on it. But we've been talking about how the threat landscape is changing. And so there is always a need for continuous evaluation of new security measures or adopting the best security best practices. That's a key here. Next slide, please. This brings me to the last section, cloud security. You may have heard many concerns such as the users can't use the cloud for security reasons, or data is too sensitive for cloud storage. But we came a long way. The cloud provides secured environment similar to on-premise or more secured in many cases. It follows the principle of shared responsibility between the cloud service providers and users for keeping the application and data safe. So here we are asking, like, why suddenly there is more emphasis on cloud security, or why cloud security is so important? It's all because of the increased attack surface as a result of remote and hybrid work can lead to more security breaches. We are modernizing using cloud and hybrid cloud models. We are incorporating security by design model in application modernization. And we use more of containers. And then that can increase the business risk. So we need to put great emphasis on cloud security here. Before I move on, let me explain what a container is. It is a software package that contains an application and its dependencies and its libraries and its configurations. So it is quite portable. What it means is, like, it can be technology agnostic, platform independent. It can be infrastructure agnostic. So we all use containers because they are standard solutions for deploying applications in the cloud or hybrid platform. It gives greater efficiency, portability, flexibility, agility, and also give an edge, competitive edge for the agencies in the market. So that's why quite a number of teams and agencies and organizations use containers. So we could think of what challenges can we expect and how should we prepare for them. Some of the challenges are limited flexibility of traditional solutions to support ever-changing workloads, increased attack surfaces, emerging trends in process automation, widespread use of DevOps and DevSecOps. We can address these challenges by focusing on building a reliable backup and recovery solutions. And then we improve the baseline security posture by using the security compliant cloud platforms, and do a regular compliance and security audit, and adopt policies aligned with the regulatory changes. So these are all some ways which we can help address, the organization can address these challenges as well. That brings me to the end of my presentation. And thank you so much for your time. And now I will pass you over to my colleague, Charlie Thompson.
Thank you, Sujatha. My name is Charlie Thompson, and welcome everyone. What I'm going to be talking about is one of those newer threat prevention approaches that Sujatha was talking about. It's called External Attack Surface Management, or EASM. To go ahead to the next slide. So earlier this year, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the agency that Spencer had mentioned, released a directive entitled Improving Asset Visibility and Vulnerability Detection on Federal Networks in around October. And I provided the link there for those folks that might be interested in it. It's probably important to note, and everyone should hear, that this guidance is not required for non-federal agencies. So it's important that you hear that. But the reason we wanted to talk about it today was we think that guidance really represents a new perspective that you probably will be of interest to people, and you'll be hearing much more about it in the future. You want to go ahead to the next slide? So basically, the directive was instructing agencies to identify their internet-facing assets through a process of asset discovery, vulnerability identification, and asset inventory. So these are concepts we'll talk about in just a minute. But really what these activities are associated with is a newer approach that's been called that external attack surface management, or EASM. And it really is timely because, as Sujatha was saying, the threat environment is constantly changing. As she mentioned, moving to those hybrid cloud environments, your decentralized workforce with more people working remotely in the field and with devices. Interestingly enough, the agile environment with continuous delivery, where you have this just really incredible rate of change and new things being put out on your network. So there's always these opportunities for exposures to occur. And then, of course, the overall Internet of Things, which is affecting some organizations even more significantly, with all sorts of different kind of devices being attached. So we thought it'd be nice to introduce this concept today because agencies will be hearing more about EASM in the future, particularly as vendors and other providers begin to bring new products and service. If you go to the next slide. So the goal of EASM, I think, is similar to everything Sujatha was talking about. It was being able to identify these external exposures or attack surfaces. And it's really important. It's focused, again, more on those internet-facing organizations. So when we talk about what EASM is, you'll find there's a lot of commonalities between things you heard about, and it's just normal protecting your different assets. So EASM doesn't really replace anything you're doing today, but it provides a new perspective. And here's really the most important thing. The point of EASM is it provides a perspective on your assets from an external perspective. So you're looking at your network pretty much like the threat actor or hacker might look at. And this is different because traditionally organizations would look from the inside out, while with EASM, you have the ability to actually look at your organization from the outside in. And as we were saying, I think what Sujatha was talking about with AI, this whole technology for EASM is heavily reliant on automation to actually make this all work. So go ahead to the next slide. So there's basically 4 steps to the EASM process, and we'll cover each one of those briefly, but there's a process of continuous asset discovery, vulnerability identification on those assets, and a creation of an inventory of those assets, and then obviously some kind of remediation actions based on any vulnerabilities you may discover. If you want to go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, what EASM does, it focuses on your internet-facing assets. Those are outside your firewall, websites, codes, ports, email servers, the whole variety of things that may be internet-facing for your organization. And if you look over at the graphic on the right, if you think of that area in the lighter blue as your traditional assets you have within your firewall for your organization, those are all being managed by you today. And then you have other assets that are internet facing, and those are shown in dark blue. And you know about those and you're managing those actively. What EASM does, it wants to discover other assets that have connections to your known assets, to discover those unknown things that actually may be a risk to you. So as the illustration shows, some may be shown in green, which is, they're fine, that's a person's cell phone, they have access. But there's other ones that you may not be aware of, those ones shown in red, that could present potential risk. And the whole point of EASM is to find out those things that you don't know about today. And what's interesting about EASM is that the asset discovery process is not intrusive. In other words, you don't have to have any kind of special privileges. It basically runs outside your network. It's definitely not penetration testing, and it doesn't require any kind of special privileges. And I'll get into a little more about how it operates in just a minute. But the whole asset discovery process has to be continuous. And you'll need to, the idea is it doesn't happen just once, but it's recurring, because I think, as we've been emphasizing the whole time, is your environment is constantly changing and you need to be ever vigilant. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, asset discovery is basically scanning your known internet-facing assets and trying to uncover your unknown or unmonitored assets. And that's really the whole point. And it does that through some technology called web crawling technology. And basically, without getting into too many of the details, is that the web crawler will take a seed, they call it. It could be something as simple as an email address or a domain name for your organization, and begin its crawling and actually search through the internet. And as it finds different assets, it'll see if there's other information contained in that asset that could actually then be linking. So give you an example. If one of your assets had a registration and that email address was somehow different than the domain name that you were originally searching, that would be a possible link, and the crawler would then kind of go off on that direction. So it's very fascinating how that works. And it will literally, as they say, crawl or discover these linkages until it reaches the edge of your organization's responsibility. So it will be a whole variety of assets that are owned or used by your agency or third-party vendors. And it can be, like I said, web application, web pages, APIs, domains, just the whole list, cloud storage, as we talked about, and the like. So that is basically what's going on with the continuous asset delivery. Go ahead, next slide. So simultaneously, as it's going through that discovery process, as it identifies an asset, it goes through a vulnerability analysis phase. And this is similar to what you do today with your own scans that you do inside your network, for example. So it'll try to detect things about that asset. So whether it's an operating system or what applications or what ports are being used, with the idea that it'll start trying to find out, like, where there's some outdated software versions, like you didn't remember this website you had and it has a software version that now is a potential risk. So we can find those that are missing updates. I thought an interesting, one of the things that it can find is whether, like on domain names or SSL certificates, it'll find out if you're close to expiration or been expired, because that could be a risk where a hacker might be able to take over that from you. And it can also validate compliance with your policy. So if you have, for example, a policy that says you only have some certain ports open, it can then take a look at that asset and determine whether it complies with that. So the whole idea then is it will use that information to do some kind of vulnerability ranking, so that you can understand what kind of weakness or risk that there may be. Go ahead, next slide. So naturally, as this information is being obtained, then we're going to the system will go ahead and save these assets into an inventory. And then this provides you and the agency with really a dynamic record of your web applications and all those internet facing assets you may have. And most of the tools that I'm aware of will allow you to do some indexing and classification. So this is where the agency can go ahead and take a look at, let me look at all certain types of assets, for example, or let me look at particular types of vulnerabilities, because what you're trying to do is develop insight. Now, obviously, one of the things you're doing is also validating what the crawler discovered. And so the good news is they'll come up with a status about, we really think this is one of your assets, or the crawler is not sure. And then you can actually mark them off saying, no, this is not my asset, and the crawler won't ever discover that again. It'll ignore that. But basically, you'll develop then really a comprehensive inventory of your assets and the potential vulnerabilities. Go ahead, next slide. So obviously the whole point of this, though, is actually to do something about it. And And this is where the EASM tools do rely on the human being here, because the tool can tell you what the risk is, why it matters, and maybe how to remediate the risks. But really the agency has to decide and prioritize vulnerabilities, because clearly you don't have enough resources to do everything for every asset. And so just as you normally do with your security policies, you would go through that process of prioritizing and then creating like tickets to go ahead and get those items fixed as appropriate. One of the advantages, though, because of the continuous monitoring, is that you'll be able to continue to see, is this issue that we identified in our external assets, is that going away? Are we knocking it down? And also, more importantly, are there new threats emerging that we weren't aware of? And so that begins, then you can see, then you continue the loop, and this is like a continuous process that you run. Go ahead, next slide. So in summary, as far as the EASM approach is, the advantages obviously is the ability to continuously monitor that external environment. And as I mentioned, most importantly, to be able to do it from that external perspective. So similar to the threat actor. And then being able to respond rapidly to this changing IT environment, because again, with all this going on, it's just always too easy for things to fall between the cracks. And this is just one more method to try to detect and identify those kind of risks. It provides you a way to manage these vulnerabilities when they're discovered. And probably equally important is to being able to move from a reactive approach where you're waiting for someone to try to breach your systems, or to a more proactive approach where you're shutting them down before that happens. So if you go to the next slide. So one of the things I mentioned was the importance of integrated tools. And I'll warn you right now that EASM is in the early phases. Some of you may have heard of something called the Gartner Hype Cycle. And basically what that does is it's a life cycle of a product or a concept. And it goes all the way up to, euphoria that this product is going to solve all our problems. And then there's naturally the crash after everyone realizes this is not the final answer. So EASM is actually in that early phase. So I'm contributing to the hype a little bit today. But what you're going to see, though, is I think it is a valuable approach. And you're going to be seeing your vendors starting to look to put together integrated tools, because right now a lot of what's available are pieces of the solution. So looking at that list, and I won't read that whole list to you, but clearly what you're looking for in an EASM tool is to provide that comprehensive approach of doing that full life cycle versus individual pieces. But really the most important thing, I think, for the IT security people is going to be the ability for these EASM tools to integrate with your existing tools. Because as I mentioned, a lot of the functions you're performing on those external assets are the same as you do for your other assets. So you really don't want to ever have to have two systems and be put in that situation. But again, EASM is very promising. It is an approach to threat prevention, I think, that is worthy of taking a look at. And as time passes, you're going to see more maturity in the tool sets that are going to be available. And with that, I will turn this back over to Spencer.
All right. Actually, just before we hand it off to Spencer, Charlie, a couple questions did come in. One, you may have covered this already, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it to you. And the questions come in. It says, continuous asset discovery will itself need external entity to do the discovery. What would be the best strategy to have, or I think it says deploy a continuously trusted external discovery tool or process?
Yeah, good point. A lot of what I understand is most of the vendor offerings are actually cloud-based. So that's a good point. So you would basically contract with one of your known vendors to provide that service. And they actually have pricing based on the number of assets you discover. So you'd have to look at that. And it is fun, I mean, because some of these vendors are actually doing that right now, because as I said, some of the information is publicly available. So that answered the first thing about how to work with someone outside. As far as the best approach, I think, is probably early. I think you're going to see a lot of changes in the market, but that's great that you're actually thinking about this right now. Did that answer your question sufficiently, or?
I think it's a good start, and
Okay.
I think you did answer the question. There were a couple other questions that have come in. Yes, he confirmed, or they confirmed that you did answer the question. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
But those of you that have asked questions earlier, and if we feel like that didn't cover your questions during the presentation, you're welcome to either resubmit the question using the Q&A, or again, use the raise hand feature. We can then unmute your line and you can ask your question live. But while we wait for those to come in, Charlie, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I want to hand things over now to Spencer.
Thank you, Phil. So I just want to have a few closing remarks. I think there's a lot of information that's been given, and I just want to highlight some areas. So we've talked through about just kind of defining what security incidents and threats were. We talked through being able to know your team, that documentation is key, and to really be able to figure out what your incident response plan is, and then how that fits overall into your in your system security plan. We've gone through and talked through some of the resources. There were templates that were given, or that are given, in the reference section of this presentation. You still have the dedicated self-assessment tools, encouraging folks to make CB a part of that, and to actually include it into both your APDs and even possibly your data quality. So you may extend data quality to really say, we're going to focus on how data is timely, accurate, complete, and secure. And that may be a good way to make sure that you are integrating these things into an overall structure and plan. Heard from Sujatha, and I think her major point is very valid. Security begins in planning. It should be built in and not bolt on. And if you can't afford the security, you can't afford the breach. So make sure that you're doing those things on the preventative side that really improve your security posture. And I think Charlie here again did a great job at talking about how early detection is key, and then offering an approach that's out there right now that may be still cutting edge, but an approach that can help highlight some of the dark spaces, some of the things you didn't anticipate, some of the vulnerabilities that you don't know exist. And those things are there. I think the overall point is that as your CWIS stretches, so should your security plan and your measures. But with that said, I hope that I hope all the states and attendees were able to pull information from this. It is a lot of information to take in, so I encourage you all to be able to, listen to this, or maybe invite security officers to take advantage of the information that we shared here. I want to thank all for attending. I want to thank my co-facilitators and my colleagues and all the contract support. The session has been recorded, and we'll make it available as soon as possible. Once it's approved, prior to approval, you can always reach out to your federal analyst, and he or she will be able to give you a copy. And lastly, I just want to underscore one thing. I think this is still yet another opportunity to highlight the marriage that needs to happen between program and IT. I think oftentimes what happens is that the workarounds, malicious or not, is that if its system is not developed in tandem with the program, staff will create workarounds and shortcuts, and sometimes that can be places where security issues are inadvertently created. And so here again, from a CWIS perspective, and myself, and I know all the other analysts push this very hard in terms of making sure that you're building your system to meet business needs and to really figure out what problems you're trying to solve and where those pain points are, and help build things that support their work and can do things that more effectively and efficient. So with that, the last thing I will say is please take advantage of your federal analyst. If you have any questions, if there's a need for further TA or support, please reach out to your analyst, um, and he or she will be able to guide you in the right direction. So with that, thanks all, and I turn it back over to Phil.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Spencer. Some great nuggets there in your closing remarks about the encouragement for practitioner-led solutions, and also a great quote there. If you can't afford the prevention, you can't afford the breach. I love that. So once again, we thank you, those who have submitted their questions. We hope that we've responded to those, though if you have additional questions after today's webinar, either reach out to your analyst or you can submit those to cwis@acf.hhs.gov. Lastly, I would like to encourage all of you to complete our webinar satisfaction survey. It will take you less than 5 minutes, probably even less than 3 minutes. So once we close out the webinar today, it should direct you directly to that survey. And we do appreciate your feedback, and we try to incorporate that in future webinars. So lastly, let me also just thank Spencer and our presenters, Charlie and Sujata. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the participants. And with that, this will close today's webinar. Thanks for being here, and thank you for your service to children and families.